Hi, I'm Una Martone with Leadership Harrisburg Area.
And I'm Janice Black with the Foundation for Enhancing Communities.
For many years, Leadership Harrisburg Area hosted an annual conference designed to provide new information, tools, and resources relevant to anyone involved with community service. We had fun themes and excellent speakers and presenters, but conferences grew increasingly expensive and participation was limited. Now, through a partnership with the Foundation for Enhancing Communities, our community foundation, we're taking some of the core content from our historical conference to a video format, so then it can be shared and distributed far and wide and free. Board Strong is a 5-segment video series designed to help executive directors, staff members, volunteers, board members, and potential board members to be the best they can be in their role of service to the nonprofit organization.
Local experts will share best practices in 5 areas covering board compliance and responsibilities, basic board member roles and responsibilities, the board and board members' role in fundraising, telling your organization's story, and board member and volunteer engagement and inclusion. The Board Strong videos can be viewed as a series or in segments. They can be incorporated into your board member orientation. Each video could be incorporated into a board meeting and then followed with discussion. Each of the videos should be utilized by anyone who is considering this level of community service so that they may fully understand the expectations of effective board service. Board Strong has applications for everyone, no matter your level of experience.
As you know, strong boards are critical to the success of nonprofit organizations, and nonprofit organizations are critical to the stability of our communities. It's an equation that starts with you. I hope you'll invest the time to watch each video in the Board Strong series to further develop your understanding, strengthen your commitment, and power your success as a board member. Serving on a nonprofit board of directors can be one of the most rewarding experiences of your life. It can also be complicated and it can be intimidating. So in the first segment of our Board Strong video series, I'd like to introduce Diane Edelstein. And Diane is a partner with Mar Dissel CPAs, and her segment is called Compliance Strong. Here's Diane.
Hi, I'm Diane. As an auditor working with nonprofits over more than 25 years, I had some things I wanted to share. Top 5 things every nonprofit board member should know about the financial and the compliance-related side of your organization. So the 5 areas we want to talk about are personnel, compliance matters, my favorite subject, interim financial reports and budgets, cash flow, and then outside reporting. There's a lot of internal things for the board, but then there's the outside. So starting off with personnel. Who are your critical employees? People are important. You know that. So what would your organization do if they couldn't come to work for an extended period of time? What happens if they move out of the area? If they are injured? Who's going to take over their role? And what is your succession plan for mission-critical people? I've seen nonprofits that have a founder in place who's been with the organization for 20, 25 years, and they don't have a plan of who's going to take over after them. And also, if your nonprofit is small enough, your critical employees might really also be your board. Your board might be volunteering as an employee. So who are the key personnel? Everyone's important, but there's critical people that you need to think about. Salaries. The board's going to set the salary for the executive director. That's the board's job. But how much does your board want to get involved with setting of other salaries? Do they want to look at the salary of a specific, the vice president, a CFO, a chief operating officer? Or are you just going to set salaries within your budget? That's a decision for a board to make. How involved are you going to be in that piece of it? Volunteers. What roles do volunteers play in your organization? You have volunteers because the board are volunteers, but you may have more volunteers beyond that. You have volunteers that are working with money, working with the books and records, or working with your participants in the program. And do you have insurance related to your volunteers? Do you have board of directors insurance? Do you also have insurance if a volunteer would get hurt while working at your organization? Do you have insurance if a volunteer would hurt one of your participants? Volunteers are very unique to the nonprofit world. The for-profit world doesn't have volunteers. You do as a nonprofit, so think about those volunteers. All right, second area we're going to talk about is compliance matters. What are all the rules that go around things? What are all the things that are important? I know nobody really wants to talk about compliance, but it's very important. And there's several elements there with compliance. First of all, internal controls. What are your checks and balances for your organization? And starting off, do you have written policies and procedures? Every organization has policies and procedures, but if they're in people's heads, they're not done consistently and they're not passed down to the next person who's going to take over that role. So do you have written policies and procedures? Do you have checks and balances? Do you have segregation of duties? Do you have different people handling the money who keep the books and records? Do you have different people cutting the checks and recording that, then sign the checks? Now, as a smaller nonprofit, segregation of duties is difficult. So therefore, the board has to be aware of that risk. Larger organizations, if you divvy up the responsibilities correctly, you can have a much better set of segregation of duties. So what does your organization have in the way of checks and balances? And those checks and balances are meant to prevent errors and fraud and abuse. So what do you have in place for internal controls? Now, to touch on fraud. Fraud happens in a lot of organizations. So you as a board should decide, how will you handle fraud once it's detected? Will you prosecute? What will you do? And you want to make those decisions long before you're in the thick of a problem. Now, many organizations go years without having any kind of fraud, but still be prepared. What are your policies? Better to decide now than once something happens. Grantor requirements. Somebody gives you money. They've got rules. What are their rules? What do you have to do? What specific things do you have to follow? Do you have special reporting? They want to see their financial information in a certain way. How is compliance monitored? Are you only supposed to serve a certain criteria of people? Is eligibility important? Whether they're low income, whether they're children of a certain age, whether they're unemployed. How do you monitor that compliance? And then if you go and get federal dollars, you've got a whole nother set of rules. And you have to have a higher level audit, a single audit, if you have a certain amount of federal dollars. So whoever's giving you money, what are their rules? What are their requirements? Are you aware of them? Other compliance matters. Who's responsible for the payroll taxes? Would you know if they're not paid? What about a pension plan? Is compliance covered? So overall, as a board, you have fiduciary responsibility to make sure all these things are done. You don't have to do it yourself. You hire an executive director, you hire key employees, but how do you know what is being done and what is being taken care of? So board responsibility. Ask questions at board meetings. Encourage others to do the same. Encourage others. I like to talk. I talk a lot. You need to ask the other person, what do they think? You need to encourage others to also ask questions, also give their opinion. If something feels off, you need to follow up. You don't wait for somebody else to ask the question. You ask the question if it doesn't feel right. Encourage open discussion and common sense. There are no dumb or unnecessary questions. In fact, I love the role of devil's advocate. I like to take the other side just for the fun of it, even though I might end up on the other way. So again, vet things properly Have discussions. Ask questions. And remember common sense. Don't enter a meeting without common sense. All right, our third area. Now, I'm an auditor, so interim financial reports and budget, that's my thing. I want to know all about the numbers. So you may not be a numbers person on a board, but you still need to have some basic information. So you should receive at a minimum quarterly, I like monthly, but at least quarterly interim financial reports. What's your revenue? What's your expenses? How much cash do you have? There should be more detail reviewed by an appropriate committee. That committee can be of one, the treasurer, could be of two or three. The whole board may want to get involved, but for larger boards, you really want a smaller committee. But you should be getting information at least quarterly, if not monthly. And ask directly if there are any warning signs or points of concern. Is there a vendor getting a check that you are uncomfortable with? Is revenue lower than you expected? Ask questions. And for most nonprofits, the only meaningful way to cut expenses is through payroll. So you don't want to wait until it's too late. You can't just lay off people instantaneously. You need to have a plan. So if you're not watching the warning signs, that's going to be a big problem. Now your budgets. You need to have a budget annually, and you as the board should understand that budget. And be realistic. Ask directly of whoever put that budget together if there's any plug numbers. So what do I mean by a plug number? Well, I see a lot of not-for-profits that figure out their expenses, and then they say, well, contributions are going to be what our expenses are. And the contributions is not a realistic number. It's just what I need to get by. So make sure you understand the numbers. Sometimes there's a plug number in some of the expenses because whoever's putting the budget together wants some buffer room. And instead of calling it, unexpected expenses, they beef up salaries, they beef up another category. So understand the numbers. And the budget should be compared quarterly and monthly to actual results. Are we doing well? Are we behind? I like monthly, but quarterly can work for your organization. As a board, you need to decide, do I want to see things quarterly or monthly? And that budget actual is a guidepost. What actions are needed? Do I need to beef up my fundraising because my revenues are down? Do I need to cut my expenses? It is your guidepost. Now, on the financial side, we've got to take a minute and talk about the accrual basis of accounting. Accrual basis of accounting means you book everything. You book your receivables, you book your payables, you book your fixed assets, and that's required to be in conformity with GAAP. That's generally accepted accounting principles. But many not-for-profits don't follow GAAP. And there's very rare instances where you have to follow GAAP because a funder has said they need to see your records in GAAP. So many not-for-profits will do a cash basis or a modified cash basis. So again, understand how your nonprofit does their books and records. Some will keep their books on a cash basis, and if they're going to have an audit, will adjust to accrual at year end. Just once a year, they'll adjust, not throughout. So understand what your books and records are. Now, two parts in the profit and loss, though it's not profit and loss when you're a not-for-profit. The revenue side, exchange transactions. You are getting paid for a service you're doing, whether you're a daycare center, whether you're a soccer association collecting fees, whether you're doing workshops. The person who pays you money gets something in exchange. Exchange transaction. Contributions. We all understand what contributions are. That's just the donations. But contributions can also be other than cash. They can be stocks. They can be cars. They can be TVs. They can be clothing. Then another revenue stream is part exchange and part donation. The best example of that is dinners and golf outings. where the person is paying more than the cost of that dinner or that golf outing. So part of it is an exchange and part of it is a donation. And you need to tell them how much is a donation. Also, you can have revenue streams that create unrelated business income transactions. And if it's unrelated business income, you have to pay income tax on that. So advertising is unrelated business income. Selling goods and services year-round that have nothing to do with your organization. Now you're competing with a normal business. Certain rent, if you're renting to others, can be unrelated business income. So it's important to understand that also. Now, just to take another second on accounting for contributions. Remember I said not all contributions are cash. So you should have a gift acceptance policy in place, and that's up to the board to have their gift acceptance policy. If it's not cash, it has to go through a committee, it has to go through a certain person. Gifts aren't always good gifts. You don't want that building with asbestos. You don't want clothes that are torn up and beat up and belong in the trash. So you need a gift acceptance policy. Also, there's certain donations that have conditions. You don't record them until the condition is met. The best example of that is I come up to you and say, I am going to do a $5,000 matching grant. For every dollar you raise, I'll give you $1 up to $5,000. You don't earn that first dollar until you raise $1, and you don't earn that second dollar until you raise that second dollar. It has a condition to it. So you don't count that until you've met the condition. Expenses. So the expenses to run a nonprofit are very similar to a for-profit. You have salaries, you have rent, you have supplies, but nonprofit reporting says you have to record those expenses by program, management in general, and fundraising, those three categories. Then you also need to record your expenses by natural categories, the salaries, the rents, the supplies. You might also have to report expenses a certain way for certain grantors. So, actually, reporting and recording of expenses can be much more difficult for a nonprofit than for a for-profit organization. You have to make sure your books and records can handle reporting by category, program, management, general, fundraising, and by natural categories, salaries, rent, and supplies, and however the grantor wants to see their information. Much more complicated than many people think. So our fourth area to talk about is cash flow. Of course, cash is king. You cannot pay your employees or your vendors in receivables. You may have strong net assets, but it's in your equipment, it's in your receivables. So you need to track cash also. So monitoring procedures should be in place to be sure you have the cash to pay the bills next month and the month after. And it actually takes a different skill set to produce those results, to explain that. It's different than basic financial reporting. Cash flow is looking to the future. Financial reporting is looking at what is done in the past. So, what can you do to tap for cash needs? Do you have a line of credit? Do you have savings? Do you have investments you can sell? Cash is important to be able to pay your bills. So you need to look at warning signs, distress signs. So decline in critical income can put a pinch on your future cash flow. Increases in expenditures are going to chew up cash. So if your expenditures are over budget, analyzing that and looking at why it's happening. If bills just aren't being paid, if you're behind in paying your vendors. And key to me is delay in information. As a board, if you are not getting those reports when you're supposed to, whether it's quarterly or monthly, if you're not getting the information, why? And sometimes it's because the financial people are overwhelmed trying to put it together. Sometimes they just don't want to give you the bad news. You're the board. You need to get the bad news if there is any. Last area to talk about, outside reporting. Up to now, we've been talking about the board and the board interacting with your employees and getting your information. Now, outside reporting. Who in the outside world needs to see your information? Well, the Form 990. All nonprofits have to file a 990 except for churches. There are 3 990s. The 990N is a postcard. If you have less than $50,000 in revenue, it's short and sweet, doesn't have a lot of information to it. The 990EZ has more information, and the 990 has lots of information and schedules and questions, and it gets done every year. It has to be filed annually. You as a board need to know that that 990 was filed. And actually, the 990 has a question that says, did the board see the 990 before it was filed? The shorter versions don't ask for that. And also, if you have the unrelated business income, you would also need to file a 990T. The National Center for Charitable Statistics says there's more than 1.5 million nonprofits in the U.S. Some of them have revenues of $5,000. Some of them have millions, multi-million dollars in revenues. So nonprofits are a large range, and the IRS is trying to keep track of that and make sure everyone is compliant. So they came up with automatic revocation. They can take away your nonprofit status if you don't file that 990 for 3 consecutive years. So you want to know that it's been filed. And here's a web link where you can go to the IRS and search for the nonprofit and see that the 990, 990N, 990EZ has been filed. Now, audits. The IRS does not require an audit. So there are many nonprofits out there that never get audits. Now, a board might require an audit. If you're on a board, you need to decide, are you comfortable with this organization not having an audit? Or should they have an audit? Now, grantor agencies usually want you to have an audit. They're going to say, show me your audit. Lenders almost always. So if you're getting a line of credit or you're borrowing money to buy property, then you're going to have an audit. And if you collect more than $750,000 in contributions in the state of Pennsylvania, the Bureau of Charitable Organizations, the Pennsylvania Bureau of Charitable Organizations says, I want a copy of your audit. If you have less than $750,000, they want a review. If you're very small, they just want your financials that you put together yourselves. So there's not a law out there that says you have to have an audit, but there are many people who come into play to decide whether or not to have an audit. What is an audit? It's conducted by an independent accountant. That's what I do. Formal examination and verification of the financial accounts. Management puts the numbers together and we agree they're accurate. So provide users of the financial statements with reasonable assurance from an independent source. That's what an audit is. What an audit is not. It's not a means of internal control. I touched on internal control, checks and balances. Financials belong to management. An auditor is just agreeing with management. The auditor is not the internal control. And it's not the best way to detect fraud. And guess what? Fraud does happen in not-for-profits. So the 2018 Association of Certified Fraud Examiners put out their report, and 40% of the of fraud detection comes from tips. Less than 5% comes from the external auditors. So do you have a system for collecting tips? Do people know who to call if they have concerns? If your organization is going to have an audit, you as a board needs to know you're having an audit, know when the audit's going to happen, when you should expect to see the results. And you need to review all the audit documentation. Look at the audit opinion. Is it a clean opinion? Does the auditor agree with the financial statements? Or did they put in a scope limitation or modify the opinion? And material weaknesses and significant deficiencies is in a report called a management letter that talks about problems in your internal control. You may not have any. You may have some. You want to read that. And then who meets with the auditors? It's not always the full board. Depends on the size of your board and who all wants to be involved. Sometimes it's a smaller committee, and then the treasurer will take the final results to the full board. So you need to decide who is going to meet with the auditors. So I just have some resources here for you. The Attorney General of Pennsylvania has a nonprofit booklet. The IRS has plenty of information on nonprofits. PANO is the Pennsylvania Association of Nonprofit Organizations. And then I listed a book here that's really meant for non-financial people, how to read nonprofit financial statements, but there's plenty of information out there on the web. Also, I want to mention charity watchdogs and also charity affiliated organizations. So many of them are looking out for the donors and give information. The one I use the most is GuideStar, because they actually have copies of 990s. Others do too, but that's the one we've always used. I can download anyone's 990. I can download yours. Now, some of these are meant to help the nonprofit, like the ECFA will help a nonprofit with tools and rules and policies, where Charity Watch is actually looking out for the donor's benefit. So there's lots of websites out there. These are just a few. You can find many more. Now that you've listened to this, you're saying, thank goodness we have a board member who understands accounting. Or you might be saying, we need a new board member who can understand accounting. Leadership Harrisburg Area can help you find board members. You might also be saying, we need an auditor. So how do I find a CPA? Well, the PICPA, the Pennsylvania Institute of Certified Public Accountants, can help you there. Compliance strong is board strong.
When serving on a nonprofit board of directors, it's really important to know that there are several different kinds of boards. There's a governing board, there's a working board, and there's even an advisory board. And sometimes they even combine depending on the size of the organization. A governing board can take up to 10 hours of a month of your time in board service. A working board can even take more than 10 hours a month of your time. It's usually with a smaller organization that has a smaller staff and needs more board participation. And then there's an advisory board that might only take a couple hours a month to give your feedback and give ideas and suggestions. And nonprofit boards, remember, there's no compensation for board members. So to talk about specific board member roles and responsibilities as part 2 of the Board Strong video series with Serving Strong, I'd like to introduce Tina Nixon, the Chief Diversity Officer and Senior VP of Mission Effectiveness at UPMC Pinnacle.
Hi everybody, my name is Tina Nixon. I'm here today to talk to you about whose job is it anyway? Understanding board roles and responsibilities. It's very crucial for nonprofit board members and staff to understand the unique roles they each have in an organization. Members of the board are expected to understand and support the organization's mission as they serve as ambassadors for the organization and lend advice and expertise to the organization's leadership. It's very important that board members understand and have passion for the mission, vision, and values of the organization. If you're interested in joining a board of directors, I think it's important to understand your role as a board member. And also, it's important to understand the organization as a whole. I know a lot of people come to me and say, hey, I want to join a board and I'll do anything. But really, you have to do a self-assessment as to what your interests are and what you're passionate about. I think it's important that individuals understand that board members' roles are to set priorities for the organization, the mission, vision, the value, the goals, the strategic plan. Board members also select the chief executive officer of the organization. They support the chief executive officer in many ways by providing evaluation, providing not only weekly but monthly support during board meetings, and really understanding what drives the chief executive officer and or leader of the organization. A really critical part of a board role is the fiduciary responsibilities, making sure that the organization is financially strong and has the appropriate resources to live out their mission and vision. Board members also protect the assets of the organization and really provide financial oversight. With that being said, not that everyone that joins the board needs to be a CPA, but you really need to understand where the money is coming from, how the money is raised, what grants and other revenue sources there are within the organization. All board members are responsible for fundraising, not just the fundraising committee. A lot of times when we get on boards, there are certain committees that are specifically geared to doing certain things. And some board members may think, oh, it's the fundraising committee. But really, it's everyone's responsibility to fundraise for the organization. And as a leader of an organization, the CEO, the executive director, it's really a part of their job to ensure that fundraising is carried out. If you're joining the board and you really believe in their mission and vision and values, this should be the organization that you contribute the majority of your resources when you think about contributing to organizations. You're there to support the organization only with your time and talent, but also your financial resources. Making sure that the organization is legally compliant. One of the things that we want to know as board members is making sure that we're in line with all the laws in accordance to the state, and making sure we uphold an ethical integrity for the organization. Really, whatever you put out there and say you're going to do as part of your mission and vision, that you are really doing that, and you don't steer away from really doing what your mission is saying out into the world. Making sure that you have a long-term strategic plan and direction for the organization. And really look at the programs and services within the organization and making sure that it's in line with the mission, and it's not just doing something for the sake of doing it or because you've been doing it so long. I always like to do an exercise called what we can start, stop, and continue as an organization. And sometimes we need to look at some of the things that we've been doing long term and just, does it make sense? Is it friend building? Is it fundraising? Is it building, programs within the community? And if it's not and not in line with your mission, then it's something that you can stop. And those are very hard things. When you talk about financial responsibility, I know a lot of nonprofits, especially during these times, really get into chasing the money. And sometimes it's not worth it. You really need to look at how much time you're spending on writing the grants and building fundraising plans and having events and making sure that it's generating revenue and not, really creating a deficit for your bottom line. Moving on to other areas that boards need to focus on, and not only boards, but the staff members also. Let's talk about executive director's roles and responsibilities. The executive director is really there for the day-to-day operations in staff management, dealing with client complaints, developing and managing policies of the programs and services. The executive director is the liaison to the board of directors. Now, I just have to say, a lot of times board members may be friends with staff or may have other relationships within the organization outside of the executive director. It is critical that there is a line, a progression or a communication line that takes place when communicating with the board. Everything should go through the executive director unless there's something egregious taking place where staff need to talk directly to the board. When things like that happen, I think it depletes the executive director's leadership role and responsibility. So I encourage all board members to redirect staff back to the executive director again, unless it's something egregious is taking place. The executive director ensures evaluation of all programs, ensures employees' performance evaluations annually, publishes the annual report, and really follows the IRS and the Pennsylvania Charitable Solicitation Act. Really, a very critical part of the executive director's job is being the chief fundraiser and making sure that you're really meeting your fundraising goals. The third tip that I'd like to provide for you today is really looking at how the board is made up and what talents you need on your board of directors. I know a lot of times when we want to get our friends involved with us so we can, do things together, but you really need to really have a board matrix and look at your organization and see what you need to help with you implementing your programs, dealing with clients, dealing with the community. So you need a variety of talent on your board: attorneys, CPAs, those who understand the makeup of your community. A lot of things the IRS looks for is, and the question they ask a lot of nonprofits, is your board made up of individuals that you serve in their community? And if not, I think it's our responsibility to make sure that we are educating and training those in our community to be a part and serve on our boards. That's why Leadership Harrisburg is a wonderful organization to help you make sure you have a diverse board makeup and really get the talented individuals you need to help move your organization forward. There are shared responsibilities between the board and the executive director, and those responsibilities include strategic planning. Really sitting in a room with people of different mindsets and coming up with strategic plans and brainstorming ideas I think it's a wonderful opportunity to really figure out where you're going and how you're going to get there. A shared responsibility also is fundraising and helping to develop the fundraising plan. A lot of times, and I say chasing the money and doing fundraising events that really aren't in line with your mission because you think it's going to raise a lot of money. Well, when you look and evaluate those fundraisers, sometimes it costs more money to put them on than it actually does in raising money. Succession planning. Oh, and this is so critical because a lot of times we don't want to think about your fabulous executive director leaving, but it's really the responsibility of the board to do that succession planning. Many times it's like, oh no, we have a wonderful executive director and we don't want her to leave, but things happen, life continues, and we really need to be prepared so that your organization doesn't miss a beat. So please, succession planning is a very critical shared responsibility for the organization. And revisit that plan on a yearly basis to make sure all the components are in place in case there's an emergency that takes place and your leadership has to leave, or you decide as board of directors it's time for the leadership to go. So it's important to have that succession planning. Developing a trusted relationship that permeates throughout the organization. Again, the board is there to support the executive director. And I can't say this firmly that you really need to have a relationship with not only your board president, but with all members of your board. But I think it's the responsibility of a board president to reach out to the executive director often to make sure that the executive director is feeling supported and help facilitate any challenges that the executive director may have. I know when I was the CEO, I would talk to my board president probably once every 2 weeks, and then we would meet before the board meeting and really plan out how the board meeting was going to flow and provide all the resources that we needed for the board meeting. And that really helped in making sure we continued to move forward and we were in line with our strategic plan and our fundraising plan. But it really helped me feel supported. When you don't have that supported relationship as an executive director, you're kind of out there on your own, and it's lonely at the top. So I encourage all executive directors to make sure, and board presidents, to make sure that you're building that relationship on an ongoing basis. Serving strong is board strong.
Probably the #1 area of need in nonprofit organizations is assistance with fundraising. And that's where most nonprofit organizations lean heavily on their board members. So what exactly can board members do to help in this capacity? It might seem intimidating, but don't let the term fundraising scare you off. It's all about relationship building, and we couldn't have a better speaker for part 3 of the Board Strong video series to talk about fundraising strong is Chad Barger. He's the principal at Productive Fundraising.
Hi, I'm Chad Barger with Productive Fundraising, and I'm here today to share my top 5 tips you can boost fundraising as a nonprofit board member. First, I want to thank you. I want to thank you as a resident of the Capital Region for the work you're doing to better our communities. Without you, all of the organizations in our region would not be possible, reaching out in our communities, doing the great programming that they do every day. I have a question. Does fundraising scare you? Are you sure what your role is with fundraising? That's what we're going to address today. You know, I get asked at least once a week, "You do fundraising? Oh my gosh, I can't believe you ask people for money all day long." I have something to tell you. I don't ask people for money all day long. I build relationships all day long. And that's what you need to do as a nonprofit board member, and what we're going to talk about today. There are a lot of misconceptions about a board member's role when it comes to fundraising. So before we get to our 5 tips, I want to go over what exactly your role is as a board member in regards to fundraising and resource development. You have 5 key roles in this area. And the first is the easiest. The first is you are a donor. You are the first donor to your organization each and every year. The board makes their gift first. You need to have 100% board giving. You set the example. You set the precedent for your community. Many foundations will actually ask this question: does 100% of your board give? Your staff need to be able to say yes to that question. And even more importantly, you can use a key phrase if 100% of the board is given. You can say, "Join me. Join us in supporting this great cause in our community." It's a lot easier to say, "Join me in supporting this," than to saying, "Will you give us $500? So use that "join me" phrase and make sure you are a donor first. Your next job is to be a visionary leader. You need to be a visionary leader in all facets of the organization's operations, but with fundraising as well. With visionary leader, you're making sure fundraising is a priority. It's a key part of the strategic plan. The strategic plan will have programming and operational goals, but you need to make sure the fundraising piece is in there that's going to provide the resources that can let you drive those goals. Next, you want to ensure the presence of strong fundraising policies and procedures. Things like a gift acceptance policy, a document retention policy, a whistleblower policy. A lot of these are operational and personnel policies, but they're key facets for fundraising as well. One of the key roles you also need to do is to make sure your organization is registered properly. Yes, you need to be a 501c3 and registered with the Internal Revenue Service, but you also need to be registered in each of the states that you plan to solicit funds. For example, if you plan to solicit funds in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, you need to be registered with the Bureau of Charitable Organizations in PA. It's a simple process. There's a small fee, but you need to make sure that's there and you're in compliance. As a board member, it's your job to ask those questions. Are we registered here? Let me give you an example of something that happened to an organization that didn't have strong fundraising policies and procedures. This organization was going about its normal fundraising, and a donor called and offered to donate a horse. Yes, I said a horse, a live animal. And they looked into it a little bit. They made sure it was true. And yes, they wanted to give them a horse. The horse was worth $8,000. So they accepted the donation of the horse. They had to board the horse. You had to feed the horse. They thought it would take a couple months to sell this horse and they'd be on their way. Well, it actually took them over a year to sell this horse. In that time period, they spent over $4,000 boarding and feeding this horse. And in the end, they only actually raised $4,000 through the sale of that horse. So it came out as a wash. You know, they didn't lose anything, they didn't make anything, but they spent all that time trying to sell this horse and raise those funds. Had they had clear policies that said, we don't accept donations of live animals, or we don't accept donations of things that need to be resold, or there are set parameters, they would have been protected from this situation. As a board member, you can make sure they're protected. And having a policy in place lets the staff not have to be the bad guy. They can say, oh, we have a policy against doing this. Perhaps we could talk about other alternatives. Perhaps you could sell the asset and then give us the proceeds. So these kind of conversations can take place, but it's your job to ensure those policies and procedures are there. Your next role is a fundraising ambassador. You're making sure that you are reaching out to the community and telling your organization's story in the community, bringing in new friends, introductions, being a thanker. We're going to talk about thanking in a little bit, but thanking the community for their support of the organization, and ultimately soliciting your network and raising funds for the vital operations of your nonprofit organization. Your final role is fundraising supporter. This is the role that you're probably most familiar with. If you were a committee member or you helped with a special event, this is what you do in that support role, where you're assisting the fundraising operation and making sure the manpower's there to carry on the operation. So those are your 5 roles, your 5 key areas you need to pay attention to. Now let's move into our 5 key tips that can help you boost your organization's fundraising. First, thank. Thank. This is a key component of the relationship building process. Thank the donors. Thank your organization's donors. Why is it so important? Thanking is the key to donor retention, and I want to share 2 key numbers with you. The first is 45%. According to the Fundraising Effectiveness Project in 2016, this was the average donor retention rate for all nonprofits in the United States. 45%. That means in 2015, if an organization had 100 donors, on average, the organization only had 45 of those same donors in year 2. Just 45. We can do better. We have to do better. We do better through stewardship, saying thank you, and showing appreciation. You can be a key part of that. An even more alarming stat is 23%. That's the first time donor retention rate. Only 23% of those same donors were around to make a gift in year 2. How do you fix this? We say thank you. Have you ever gotten a thank you call from a nonprofit that you support? Say you send a $100 donation in and the next week a board member calls you simply to say thank you? Has it happened? Probably not. If it has, did you give a gift the second year? You probably did. And stats have shown that it really makes a big difference. It makes them feel appreciated. And as a board member, you doing this is so much more powerful than a staff member. The staff member's paid to say thank you. Yes, they appreciate the support, but the donor knows that. You're a volunteer. Your thank you goes so much farther. So what's it sound like? How do these calls go? They're simple. Hey, this is Chad. I'm a board member with ABC Charity. I'm reaching out to say thank you for your support. Thank you so much for your donation you made last week. And then we pause. This is the fun part. They don't know what to say. They think you're going to ask them for a donation. So they'll actually typically say, well, thank you. So they thank you for thanking them. That's fun. Then you just say, if you have a few seconds, I'd love to chat a little bit and learn why you supported our organization. You have a little conversation and then you wrap it up with one more thank you. They're simple calls, they're fun, and they have a huge impact on the organization and donor retention. So that's your first tip. Thank on behalf of the organization. Your second tip, introduce your network to the organization. Open your network to the organization. You don't have to have a huge network. You don't have to have a network of all high net worth individuals. You have a network. The key is you have a different network. You have a different network than the organization currently has, and you have a different network than your other board members. If you all open your networks, you have a huge base that your organization can use to build relationships with. So what's this look like? You don't have to walk down your street, knock on every door of your neighbors and say, will you give $500 to this wonderful organization? That's the fear. We don't need to do that. We need to build relationships. Fundraising doesn't look like that. Fundraising looks like bringing people with you to events, sharing information, putting information out on your social media. That's what it looks like. So, your organization has its event coming. Instead of arranging to sit with 3 other board members at the gala table, bring 3 couples with you. Instead of having a foursome of 3 board members or 3 current donors along with you for the golf tournament, invite 3 new people. And do the same thing every year. Keep broadening that network. Keep bringing in new people and introducing new people to the organization. One of the easiest solicitations you can make is actually reaching out to the people that you brought to last year's event and saying, hey, this event is coming up again. We had a wonderful time last year. I'm hoping maybe you'll get a table this year, and invite 3 people you know that you think would have a great time. So that's how we introduce. That's how we keep things moving forward. Now you'll notice with all of these introductions, I didn't say, reach out to a vendor you use, reach out to a local foundation. They were all individuals. And here's why. I want to look at this chart. This chart is the Giving USA statistics for 2015. It shows all giving in the United States for that year in billions. So we have billions of dollars here, and look where the bulk of those billions are coming. It's coming from individuals. 72% of all funds come from individuals. And that's not through bequests. That's off there on the side in that 8%. And it's not foundation money. It's not family foundations. It's not the corporate dollars. It's individual annual donations from individuals. That's where we should focus our time. When we're chasing after those corporate dollars, we're going after the smallest piece of the pie, and we have the most competition. So open the organization, open your network to individual donors. Number 3, offer assistance. This is your 3rd way you can really help the organization. Offer assistance. Just reach out and say, how can I help? It's the easiest thing you can do, and it's the thing I see nonprofit board members do the least. Typically, nonprofit board members wait around to see, what are they going to tell me to do, or what are they going to email me about? When people get busy, it just doesn't happen. We all get in the trenches and we keep doing our own thing. You forget to ask, and the nonprofit staff forget to ask. The nonprofit staff might be scared to ask. They might not want to appear as though they're incompetent or can't handle their job, but if they had a few more, little bit more manpower, they could get things done so much faster and more effectively. So reach out, once a month or so, just reach out and say, what can I do to help with fundraising? What can I do to help you reach your goal this month? What's one little thing I could do in 15 minutes that would really move us forward? These key questions, being proactive and reaching out, make a huge difference. It actually helps with burnout too. Staff burnout in the nonprofit sector is a huge problem, especially among fundraising staff. Unfortunately, the average tenure of a nonprofit development director in the United States is just 16 months. The flip side of that is the average time it takes to build a donor relationship to the point of being ready to ask for a major gift is 18 months. So they don't even make it there. They either burn out or, perhaps staff and board isn't patient enough to wait for those relationships to develop. So do what you can to reach out to staff and say, what can I do to help? Especially on the fundraising front, to prevent that burnout, to keep the staff along, and really build those relationships for the future. The 4th way you can help your organization is to allocate resources, to ensure the proper resources are allocated to conduct a successful fundraising campaign. The old adage, it costs money to make money, is definitely true. You need to have a fundraising budget. It doesn't have to be a huge fundraising budget, but there have to be funds available. I've seen organizations that don't have fundraising staff and just can't even pay for a mailing to reach out to current donors. That has the highest return on investment of pretty much any activity all year, but they fret over spending a few $100s to raise a few $1,000s. So make sure there are budgeted funds. Once you have that budget, once you maybe have some staff dedicated to fundraising, another key item to look into is outsourcing. You want those precious fundraising staff hours devoted to building relationships with your best donors and reaching out and building relationships with new donors, not on trivial tasks. I've seen it so many times that the year-end appeal is coming, and instead of reaching out to a mail house or an organization, the mail trays come into the break room, 15 volunteers come in for 3 days, and we stuff the mailing in-house. You know, it can be a great activity. It can lead to bonding. Yes, you save some money, but in the end, the staff member is still coordinating all of that. They're still arranging that. And a mail house can often do that for $150, $300, save all that time, save that energy, and they end up getting cheaper postage costs as well. So just think smartly. What can we outsource? What should our staff be doing? Another area where this is especially true is with grant writing. I often say a development person's role is to get the invitation to write the grant, not to actually write it. Their job is to build that relationship. It keeps coming back to that all the time, the relationship building. So you can outsource your organization's grant writing. For a few $1,000s a year, that can be done for the whole year. For a few $100s, a specific proposal can be done. And that staff member can be out building relationships and staying focused on what you need them to focus on. More time for relationship building. That is the key for all of this. And finally, invest in board training. Save some resources for the board. Invest in getting yourselves trained to be a more productive, more thoughtful, more external looking board. Bring in an outsider. Bring somebody in with a fresh perspective that can give you some input and have that discussion with. You know, a fresh voice, new perspective, ideas. You don't even have to spend a lot of money on this. I've actually seen a situation where 2 executive directors that had been in their roles for a fair amount of time did a training swap. I'll train your board, you train mine. Just come in with some new ideas and had a discussion and really took a lot of benefit. But take that time to take a step back and say, how are we doing in our job? How are we doing in fundraising? Are we playing the roles we need to play? Your 5th item is to push the envelope. Push the envelope with fundraising. What's the first thing so many organizations think of the second there is a funding shortfall? You know, the executive director or the treasurer says, you know, it's looking like we're going to come up about $10,000 short this year. How are we going to close that gap? Joe, the board member, raises his hand and says, I saw a great event done by this organization the next town over. We should do that. It's always an event. And events can really be a slippery slope. You know, they take a ton of time, they're often expensive, and they're hard to get rid of once you have them. So think outside the box. Maybe it doesn't need to be an event. Maybe it can be a peer-to-peer campaign, or the board puts out a match. There's a variety of other options that don't take that much time. If it is going to be an event, let's think outside the box. Let's push the envelope on that event. How can it be unique? How can it be an event that people in the community want to come to and don't feel like they have to go to? How can we be one of those key events in our community that everybody is going to love? That's what folks want to sponsor. That's where the big dollars are going these days. Do you want to go to the top event in this slide or the bottom event? They're actually fairly similar in cost. The top event lowered the lighting, brought in a few unique elements. The second one rented the local expensive hotel ballroom. You know, you can think outside the box, don't have to spend a lot of money, and create something that folks want to go to rather than what they've had to go to for years. If you're not excited about going to your own organization's events, you've got a problem. So let's push the envelope and encourage the staff and other board members to think a little creatively. Also, you don't always have to be after cash. It's another way you can push the envelope. Take a close look at your organizational budget. What could you reach out for as an in-kind donation? Is it janitorial supplies? Is it office supplies? Is it copy paper? Is it the copy release? Is it the audio visual for your banquet? There are probably things you're paying for that you could build relationships with and get as donated funds. As long as it's relieving a line in the budget, it's the same as cash. It's when you're seeking donations of in-kind items that would be nice to have, but you don't necessarily have to have, that we run into a problem when we're getting diverted. But if you have that relationship and can get those funds as in-kind, go for it. A great way to push the envelope and think outside the box a little bit. Finally, just be courageous. Don't be afraid to take risks. So often we get stuck in our ways and we say, why are we doing this? Because we've always done it this way. You know, if we always do the same things, the law of diminishing returns kicks in, and eventually we're going to start to go downhill. So be courageous. Think outside the box. Push the envelope. Why are we afraid to do this? Why are we afraid? Well, I think it goes back to caveman days, when if we thought outside the box, if we did something different, it could be fatal. If we didn't go looking for berries at the same place where we knew the berry patch was, it could lead to starvation. If we didn't go hunting at the same place, maybe we didn't find the herd. It could lead to starvation. Well, failure is no longer fatal, but we still act like it is. We don't need to. We can push the envelope, we can be courageous and try new things. What's one great example of an organization that did that in recent years? The ALS Foundation with the Ice Bucket Challenge. They put out a simple challenge to their constituency to do something a little different, a little fun, and it went viral. It took off. The whole nation, sometimes other places in the world even did the Ice Bucket Challenge. Many of you, I bet, had a bucket of ice water dumped upon yourselves and cut a check to the ALS Foundation. What happened? They were able to push the needle forward. They've made significant advances in the fight to find a cure for ALS. They were courageous. They did something different. What can you do in your organization to be courageous as well? So those were our top 5 tips to help boost fundraising at your nonprofit organization. They were to thank your donors, to introduce the organization to people in your network, to offer assistance and say, what can I do to help proactively, to allocate the proper resources for fundraising, and to push the envelope and be courageous. Thanks for watching. I'm Chad Barger with Productive Fundraising, and I look forward to seeing you out in the community raising the vital funds that your organization so desperately needs to move its programs forward. Fundraising strong is board strong.
If your nonprofit organization is looking for some ideas and some inspiration to really tell the story of your organization to where it resonates with people and it becomes meaningful to other people that you're trying to attract as donors and patrons and volunteers and board members, there are some simple things that you can do to achieve consistency in your messaging. It's all about telling your organization's story, and we couldn't have asked for a better storyteller in part number 4 of the Board Strong video series. Story Strong features Stuart Landon. He's the producing artistic director of Open Stage of Harrisburg, and he's also with Midtown Cinema. You're gonna love hearing Stuart's ideas.
Hi, I'm Stuart, and I'm here today to talk about telling your organization's story. So, I think that it is so important that you find, first of all, what is most important to you when it comes to the organization. Some moment, perhaps, that you had with the organization previous to joining the board or as a board member that you are able to share. Something really personal. So, my first suggestion is to make it personal. Now, this can be both when you're talking with somebody in person, over the phone, or if you're writing, or even writing social media posts for that matter. I think it's important that you make it absolutely personal. I have a board member who is so good, not just spreading the gospel of Open Stage of Harrisburg, as I like to say to my board members, because she's an amazing ambassador because every single experience that she has, she turns it in her social media posts and in personal conversations to something that is relatable and something that is specific to her experience, something that she really enjoyed in a performance or a production. So I think that's applicable to pretty much any product or any particular program at your nonprofit as well. Secondly, I'm going to say that it's important to be simple and it's important to be specific. Simplicity is what part of the story you're telling, and specific in who you are telling it to. Now, obviously you're telling it to whoever you're telling it to, but my suggestion is that you imagine you're telling it to somebody who is a huge advocate for your organization. Somebody who is absolutely 100% a supporter. Somebody who's very enthusiastic. Somebody you've recently onboarded as a donor, or somebody who's a long-time member of your constituency. And within that, you imagine you're talking to them. It's going to affect the way you're telling your story. And then also that you have a very simple part of your story to tell. You don't need to tell about every single product and every single element of your organization. So just choose one. I think that kind of goes back to that personal story as well, but this could be about whatever might relate to that audience member, of course, too. Hey, I'm at Open Stage, I'm going to tell you about my education program, or I'm going to tell you about my cabaret series because I hear you like musical theater, whatever that is, and whatever that donor, that potential donor might be passionate about. So you could sculpt it and be specific, of course. Keep it simple. And be specific as if you're talking to that person that is really an advocate for your organization. So in theater, you've probably heard of method acting. They use it in film as well. And it's kind of gotten a bad rap, but I'll boil it down, is that basically it's just a technique, whatever that is, your toolkit for your particular art. So as an actor, you have a methodology, any more than a painter might have a methodology. Or a surgeon might have a methodology. And they've got a technique that they've learned from both class and hopefully they've gone to medical school, and they've also done other surgeries, so they have a technique. Within method acting, most methods include actions that you as an actor are playing an action. You want to get something from your partner. So here I am on stage playing a scene with you, and I want to get something from you. So the way to play an action is to think of a verb or think of a phrase that is active. And I like to keep it positive when you're talking to donors, of course, because of course in a play you might be angry at your acting partner. And you don't want to be angry at your potential donor. So I think one that I'll give you today is to get them to join your party. So everything that you do, everything you say is active and getting them to join your party. What does that mean? Well, why is your party different? Why is your party better? Why is your party more exciting? They're invited to a lot of parties, so why yours? Next up, I think it's important that you gain stories from your constituency, that you collect information, and this is why. There's this fantastic book that I read that talks about the intrinsic value of theater being far more important to measure than the quantitative data. So what I mean by that is that it is important that you find a way to measure and talk about the value of your organization to your constituencies, and the way that you do that to your main audience. So if your organization houses the homeless or provides meals, talk to the people that get the meals and find out their stories. I talk to my audience members, sure, but I have to say that there was this big moment for me when, not so long ago at Open Stage, when I realized that our mission is centered around the artist, not the art. We are dedicated to supporting a company of artists that do theater. That's not our mission statement. I'm definitely paraphrasing. But artists are at the center of our organization's mission. So last year, about a year ago, I gathered 4 artists, 4 really awesome women, and paired them up and had them talk to each other, and I just listened to them talk to each other, and my life was changed. The way they talked about it was different than anything I could have made up. So I think it's creating both opportunities for your constituencies to talk to one another, and you simply listen. Because when people are being interviewed and or asked to offer a testimonial, things get really, really, I don't know, boxy and structured. And it's much more exciting and enlightening for you to offer opportunities to collect those stories, so you can figure out how your organization is changing lives. Lastly, I think it's important that you stay true to your brand. And I'll offer a little story here. Many years ago, our slogan at Open Stage of Harrisburg, our tagline, was "Outstanding live theater just 180 miles off Broadway." Adorable and fun, but our organization isn't necessarily known for being adorable and fun. So it wasn't necessarily on brand. Did it seem accessible? Yeah, it did. Outstanding live theater. Of course, I hate the word live theater as opposed to dead theater. And then just 180 miles off Broadway, exclamation point. As people were leaving the theater, I kept hearing people saying, "I love that there's big questions being asked. I love that my mind is being opened." And our name is Open Stage of Harrisburg. So that next year, we did a campaign where we said, "Caution, warning, may open your mind," like the side of a medicine bottle. And the following year, we distilled it even further, and we said, "Open your mind." We said, "Take action, guys. Open your mind. Come to Open Stage and open your mind." Now, we've been using that tagline, that slogan, for a couple of years now, and it's really worked. And I think it's because it's so on brand, and it's part of who we are. So I think that it's important that these 5 things you consider when telling your story of your nonprofit. First of all, make it personal. Second of all, keep it simple and specific. Third, why should people attend your party? Figure out what that action is for you. Listen and gain those stories so that you can figure out how you tell your story and why are you valuable to the community because of how you've affected lives. And lastly, stay true to your brand. So make sure all that language that you're putting out into the world is true to your brand and is connected to what kind of an organization you are. So thanks so much. I hope this has been useful. Story strong is board strong. Huh.
We are so fortunate to include Dr. Liney Carter in the Board Strong video series. Part 5 is all about board member recruiting and retention, as well as volunteer recruiting and retention. Dr. Carter is Vice President of College Advancement at HAC, and she's the Executive Director of the HAC Foundation. Dr. Carter brings a wealth of experience and knowledge, and she pulls all of that into a fantastic presentation that I know you're going to gain a lot of information from. So get your pen out and take notes from Dr. Carter.
I am sharing information that is going to be relevant to your nonprofit, no matter how small or big you are. While HAC is a large institution, these best practices will also work for smaller grassroots organizations. You too deserve high-performing board members. Your missions are critical to our communities. And so please note that the information will be a buffet for you. Choose from the buffet what will work for you. I am confident, however, that you will find that most of this information is applicable to you, no matter the size of your nonprofit organization. Board and volunteer recruitment and retention are essential to any nonprofit organization. Board members and volunteers can make or break a nonprofit. The goal is for these individuals to make, not break. I'm honored to share with you my top 5 tips for recruiting and retaining high-performing board members and volunteers. My first tip for you is to develop clear expectations and responsibilities. Before you can recruit high-performing board members and volunteers, nonprofits must have written and clear expectations and responsibilities. These expectations and responsibilities should be embraced by the executive director, the nonprofit organization's officers, and the full board. Ideally, the full board should vote on these expectations and responsibilities to add credibility to the process. If you have clear expectations and you discuss them regularly, board members and volunteers cannot say they were unaware of them. Here are some examples of expectations of board members and volunteers. Participate in determining annual fundraising priorities. Another example is to provide oversight to investments and use of funds. In addition, a responsibility could be to represent and promote the organization and the community. And of course, a responsibility should be to make an annual charitable contribution to the nonprofit organization. Other examples are to serve on at least one standing committee, attend 4 out of 6 board meetings per year, attend at least one special event each year, and to introduce at least 3 new donors to your nonprofit each year. Also, it's important to note that you should recommend individuals for possible membership on the board. And last but not least, your board members should be expected to sign conflict of interest statements and confidentiality statements. Before I was hired at HAC, we had board members who were unclear about expectations and responsibilities. They did not perform as well as those who were quite clear about their expectations and responsibilities. I do have some recommendations for you. I recommend that you post your board member responsibilities and expectations on your website. You should share that website link with individuals when they email you, call, or write to you about possibly joining your board. And you should use a website address that is easy to remember. For example, we use at HAC, hac.edu/recruitboard. I also recommend that you identify potential high-performing board members by reading articles, reviewing the board membership list of other nonprofits, issuing news releases about board vacancies, and asking for recommendations from those who you respect in the business community and the overall community. At HAC, we review our alumni and donor lists to identify potential board members and volunteers. Tip number 2, be selective with prospective board members. There are nonprofit organizations that have one criterion for board membership. You just have to be able to breathe. As we know, that is unacceptable. Nonprofit organizations should want the best board members, and they should not apologize for that. You want to be selective to be sure you do not recruit the wrong people. If you happen to recruit the wrong people, it will be very difficult to get them off of your board. Following are some qualities that you should seek in prospective board members. They should be affluent, authentic, civil, committed, empathetic, ethical, hardworking, influential, mission-oriented, and professional. However, there are some prospective board members you should avoid at all costs. If you encounter them, you should run, Forrest, run! Examples are bigots, womanizers, those who are mean-spirited, those who are all talk and no action, and those who have been part of scandals. If you do not avoid these types of people, their problems and drama will become your problems and drama, especially for your nonprofit organization. You really should have a good idea of your organizational gaps and needs before recruiting board members and volunteers. For example, if you need high-performing accounting, law, and marketing experts on your board, recruiting them to your board should be a top priority for you. If you need high-performing women, millennials, and people of color on your board, recruiting them should also be a top priority for your nonprofit. Also, your nominating committee really should be comprised of your very best board members. Low-performing board members should not serve on this nominating committee because they have not earned that privilege. Also, you do not want your lower-performing board members to inadvertently or purposely attract other low-performing prospective board members. To help ensure you are recruiting high-performing board members, you should require them to apply for membership on your board. If they believe they are too good to apply, you do not want or need them. If they're too good to apply, chances are they will be too good to serve your nonprofit organization. After your nominating committee reviews the applications of prospective board members, they should decide if they should be invited to an interview. Never, ever appoint someone to your nonprofit board without interviewing him or her first. During the interview, members of the nominating committee should take turns asking questions. Following some examples of questions that you might want to consider asking when you're interviewing prospective board members. For example, why do you want to serve on this board? Another question might be, if you are appointed to this board, what types of accomplishments will you help us to achieve within 2 years? Another question might be, please tell us about your fundraising experience. Also, you might want to ask, what do you enjoy the most about fundraising? Also, what do you enjoy the least about fundraising? A good question, especially for a nonprofit board member, would be, tell us about a time that you demonstrated courage in a professional or board setting. So, when the prospective board member leaves the interview, the nominating committee should discuss the interview and determine if this person would be a good fit for your board and if you should recommend them to the full board. Those candidates who do not receive the support of the majority of the nominating committee should not be recommended for membership on your board. I recommend that the full board be asked to vote on all of your prospective board members who pass the muster of the nominating committee. Now that we have focused on recruitment of board members and volunteers, let's turn our attention to the retention of those same individuals. My third tip for you is to match your volunteers' interests and strengths to your organization's needs. Once you recruit high performers to your nonprofit organization board, you should put the same effort into retaining them. You should conduct a thorough board orientation for all new board members. An orientation will set them up for great success on your board. During the orientation, you should discuss the organization's history, its mission, long-term goals and special initiatives, and you should also discuss the board standing committees and projects in great detail. You should then ask your board members to tell you which standing committees they would like to serve on and which projects they would like to assist with. Also, you should ask them how they believe their experiences and skill sets would help the committees to progress. This discussion will help you to determine if the committees will in fact be a good fit for the board members. The better the fit, the better the experience for the board member. At HAC, we have 5 campuses. Our board members raise funds for the campus they are affiliated with. One of our best board members is a graduate of our Gettysburg campus. He represents that campus on the HAC Foundation board. Because he has a love, connection to, and affinity for the Gettysburg campus and Gettysburg community, he has the campus's best interests at heart, and he happily and effectively carries out his board responsibilities. Our current goal, frankly, is to clone him. I recommend that you ask your board members on at least an annual basis if they would like to remain on their current committees or change committees. Give your board members a buffet of projects to work on and allow them to choose the ones that resonate the most with them. I recommend that you update the full board on the major accomplishments of the committees so that they can all know what each committee is working on, and it might give them some ideas about projects they want to work with or committees they want to serve on. My fourth tip for you is to provide administrative support for your volunteers. Realizing that some nonprofits have small staffs, your board members and volunteers should not be expected to get bogged down with administrative duties. Instead, employees of the organization should be handling most, if not all, of the administrative duties. Your board members and volunteers have professional, family, and community duties. Therefore, make it easy for them to be effective board members and volunteers. When you need something from them, please ask for it and provide a deadline. Your board members and volunteers should not have to type meeting agendas or minutes, for example. Again, employees really should be handling those types of duties. If you are asking your board members and volunteers to handle administrative duties, then they cannot handle the mission-critical projects for your organization. At HAC, employees do the following tasks and duties for our board members and volunteers. We, as staff, we develop the meeting agendas and minutes. We print the meeting packets for our board members and volunteers. We draft letters for our board members to sign. We send meeting reminders. We also update our online portal on a regular basis. Yes, we have an online portal for really one-stop shopping. So I do want to share some recommendations with you. I do recommend that you create an online portal for your board members and volunteers. Require them to access it with a username and password. And you want to include the meeting dates, times, and locations of your meetings, an ability for them to RSVP for meetings, meeting agendas, meeting minutes, policies and procedures, financial reports, PowerPoint presentations, and it also would not hurt for you to include articles about nonprofit boards and articles about fundraising. Again, these portals provide one-stop shopping for your board members and volunteers, and it really saves you time and them time. Instead of your board members and volunteers having to search through many emails to find information about your nonprofit, they can simply access your portal and find what they need quickly and easily. Our fifth and final tip is to evaluate your volunteers. Now that you have recruited high-performing board members and volunteers and you are doing a pretty good job of retaining them, you must evaluate them. Some organizations are not comfortable evaluating their volunteers because the volunteers are not being compensated monetarily. That does not matter. Any board member or volunteer who is not comfortable being evaluated probably should not serve on your board. The evaluation process that you undertake should be fair, simple, and efficient. You should review the board member responsibilities and rate them on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest, how well each board member is doing with that responsibility. Remember, we talked about those responsibilities with tip number 1. The evaluation should be conducted by your nominating committee at least once a year at the conclusion of your fiscal year. The evaluation should be documented in writing and discussed with each board member in person. Those board members who are doing well should be told that and commended for their service. If there are minor areas for improvement, that information should be shared with them as well. Those board members who are not doing well should be told that, and suggestions should be provided so that they can improve. As always, I recommend that you start off with the positive, when applicable, and transition to the areas that need improvement. When appropriate, you might want to suggest that a board member resign from your board or take a break from the board and reapply for membership in the future. I have worked with 10 boards over the course of my professional career. In cases when board members were not doing well, when they were asked to resign, they were relieved. Most low-performing board members are aware that they are not performing well and they want to do better. Help them to find a more appropriate role in your organization or help them to resign gracefully. I do recommend that you remember that high-performing board members do not, I repeat, do not like serving with low-performing board members. Therefore, it is your responsibility to evaluate your board members and thus remove the low-performing ones. It is your responsibility to hold board members and volunteers accountable and to be honest, candid, and respectful with your feedback. At HAC, our students are our #1 priority. They deserve high-performing board members, and I never forget that. I hope you have found these tips to be helpful. Your board members and your volunteers can be the lifeblood of your nonprofit organization. When you have high-performing ones, it is so rewarding. And when you do not, it can really drain an organization. I encourage you to take advantage of these tips and these recommendations, and I hope you have found great value in this information. Thank you. Performance strong is board strong.
Nonprofit organizations are the backbone of the community.
We want to be able to see how we can help them most.
We love our community because we're part of the community.
Orrstown Bank has a huge impact in the community by continuously volunteering for any kind of event that is going on in the area.
We definitely like to make sure that we are helping, we're serving, we're lending a helping hand by all the different causes that the nonprofits have, that we're supporting that.
I want to thank you for your community service and for your current or future role as a nonprofit board member. I hope this video and the whole Board Strong video series has been a valuable resource for you. Please know that there are many systems of support for your continued success. Leadership Harrisburg Area provides customized board training and related workshops. Just call to set one up. Leadership Harrisburg Area also publishes a community caller newsletter where you can look for and post volunteer and board service opportunities. It's like Match.com for organizations that need people and people who want to serve. Of course, Leadership Harrisburg's Community Leadership Series and Executive Leadership Series are known for preparing leaders and making connections for effective community service. Check out the Leadership Harrisburg Area website for more information. The Foundation for Enhancing Communities offers grant and funding opportunities, grant training, grant support, and other services including management of endowment funds, nonprofit management services such as accepting donations and gift acknowledgement, financial reporting, audit assistance, budget preparation, and more. The Foundation for Enhancing Communities also offers contractual services to manage capital campaigns for nonprofit organizations. We would love to support these important functions for your organization so that you can focus all your resources on your mission fulfillment. Thank you again for your commitment to making Pennsylvania's capital region the best that it can be.
So we've spent all this time talking about how board members can serve nonprofit organizations and given such great information by our facilitators in the Board Strong video series. But there's one note that I would like to share, and it's directed to the executive directors and presidents and senior staff of the nonprofit organizations that receive board service. Where are you serving the community? There's no better way to recruit friends for your organization and to really build goodwill than to go out and serve others. Roll up your sleeves for another organization as a volunteer or even a board member, and you will find the benefits tenfold, and you will also gain so much insight as to how you're working with your board members when you're serving as a board member for someone else. So that's my 2 cents for what it's worth. I'd like to close the Board Strong video series with a sincere, heartfelt thank you to our partners at the Foundation for Enhancing Communities, to our team at Final Focus Productions who have been fantastic to work with and so supportive of this cause. And I'd also like to thank our friends at Orrstown Bank for serving as a resource to the community as well. I hope the information is valuable, and please stay in touch with Leadership Harrisburg Area. Thank you.